Okay, thanks for joining us this afternoon. Wendy asked me to do a little bit with the two new chapters in the Leadership 2.0 process, specifically the power of emotional intelligence and understanding diversity while creating inclusion. And so I thought what I would do is, let me just share my screen here. Okay, is everybody seeing that okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I thought I would just give a little bit of an overview of what's in the chapters, and then we can do a couple of examples from the facilitation material as a group interactively and look at taking a little bit of a deeper dive into that. So if I take first the chapter 3, which is the power of emotional intelligence, I did a little bit of extra reading on this topic in preparing for this. And one of the things that I found interesting was there were a couple of authors that were talking about the words emotional intelligence juxtaposed to each other. And that often when you speak to people about emotional intelligence, sometimes they stop at the first word emotional and come up with a negative connotation because they understand that emotional means characterized by your emotions or having an intense feeling. And when they stop at that, they tend to kind of build up a block around emotional intelligence. So if you can open up the awareness and say, well, look at the word intelligence too, which is really about our ability to acquire or our capacity for new knowledge and skills. When we put those two things together, then in emotional intelligence, what we're really talking about is our capacity to be aware of not only our own emotions, but also to others so that we can more judiciously and empathetically handle those interpersonal relationships. So I thought that was just kind of an interesting view that I wanted to share with you. If we look at what's in the chapter basically defines emotional intelligence as being made up of 4 core skills. So on the personal level, there is self-awareness, which relates to understanding your own moods and emotions and how they affect other people. There's self-management, which relates to when you understand those, now how do you control or redirect them? Or how are you able to think about things before acting out purely based on your emotions? And then from the standpoint of other people, there's social awareness, which is this understanding the emotional makeup of other people and also the effects that your words and actions can have on them and their emotional state. And then we have taking that to relationship management, which is taking that understanding and understanding how you can then influence the emotional clarity of other people to better build more effective and stronger relationships. So the chapter then takes that foundational definition of those 4 elements and then talks a little bit further about how do they play into motivation and culture. How does emotional intelligence affect individual and organizational success? And then there's a nice discussion on what are some of the characteristics of high and low emotional intelligence people. And then there's a discussion on ways that you can work with others to help raise the emotional quotient in yourself and in your organizations to higher levels. So as an example from the facilitation material, I thought I would focus on this lower left piece here, where they talk about the characteristics of the high and low emotional intelligence. And one of the group questions that I thought maybe we could reflect on as a group is how can low emotional intelligence impact the functionality of an organization? And if you're not familiar with the chapter or haven't read it yet, some of the things they talk about of people who have low emotional intelligence are people who can't control their emotions. They tend to be ambiguous or unaware of the feelings of other people, even people that they may be close with. They really struggle with personal and professional relationships, and really struggle with being empathetic or understanding the importance of emotions. So with that, I'd like to just open it up to some group thoughts and group sharing on how we think low emotional intelligence could impact the functionality of an organization. Would anyone like to start?
Well, clearly it can range from totally disruptive if they are out of control, as it were, or can lead to frustration, disengagement, feeling upset by others at the way they're either being ignored or being treated in one way or another. So it certainly lowers any group, common, joint spirit in working together effectively. People tend to run off in their own direction then, either to avoid that person who's out of control or whatever. So yeah, group effectiveness totally suffers.
Okay. Thank you, Sandy. Nancy, you have your hand up?
There I am. Yeah,
excuse me, Nancy, just for those who just joined, we talked a little bit about the content of the chapter, and now we're looking at the question of how can low emotional intelligence impact the functionality of the organization. Go ahead, Nancy.
I actually think this kind of ties to another box in that square, and that's the part of being self-aware, because if you're not aware of how you interact with this group, it wouldn't even occur to you that you are having a negative impact on the group. And I know if you buy that book, Emotional Intelligence, that's published by that company out of California, it comes with an assessment. And when I took it, I personally was surprised on some of the lower scores I got in relationship management and self-awareness. That goes back to, I think many people think they're very attuned to the emotions of others and how they interact with them. And I would suggest that might not be true. And that's going to kind of tie into what Sandy has. That really affects the group. If you're not aware, you could be creating problems and not know it.
That's almost an indication. See, when I tell myself how emotionally intelligent I really am, that becomes an indication how little emotionally intelligent I really am. If we're not stepping back and actually challenging what we believe to be true about ourselves. And so, Nancy, thank you for sharing that with me. See, I'd never share that. I'm perfect. I would never have anything like that come up for me. So it wouldn't, no, I'm only kidding. I mean, but that.
No, Arnie, we know you're perfect. That's okay.
Right. That's that perfection that shows my imperfection. I mean, it's so, but yes, that's a major issue, that it's the lack of self-awareness that becomes the clue. It ain't me, it's everybody else. Yeah.
Thinking, Virginia, that in that organization, the person with lower emotional intelligence probably perceives directions and goals and where the company is going in a very different way from his or her team.
Yes.
And because of that, it almost creates its own dysfunction, simply because their perception is not as clear.
Thank you.
Also, in the sense that they often overlook signals and clues, and therefore can't take those into account, which may be very positively contributory, but they may, especially if it's somebody who's maybe quieter or has a different style or what have you. And it really blocks extra contributions.
Any other thoughts? How can we help people or organizations who are operating from a low emotional intelligence level? How can we help elevate them or bring them up or out of that?
I think that's a perfect opportunity for assessments, Virginia. Sometimes I think people need data to work with. And if using the tools that we have available to us to help them recognize where they are, I think it's easier than to lead them into a conversation of what we could do to help them move forward as an organization.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Nancy. Linda, were you going to say something?
Yeah, and now I've just lost my whole train of thought. I think that making them aware that they are operating at a low emotional intelligence spectrum, and that's got to be done very diplomatically. Of course, you don't want to tell people they're idiots, but I think if you can diplomatically make them aware of the issue, the old knowledge is power. If they kind of go, oh, well, that's why that's been happening, or that's why the team doesn't function well, et cetera. So I think that's kind of the entree into helping them solve the problem. If you can't, first you've got to make them aware, and hopefully they recognize that that is the problem, or one of the aspects of the problem.
Anybody else? Sandy?
Yeah, I don't want to take us down a different path, but I'm just wondering how many people have actually taken the EQ assessment that TTI also has. I know even in the old Intermetrics, you could do an EQ report from the way it was done, but I mean, there is an EQ one, which, I'm just wondering how many people have taken it and how you felt about it.
Does anyone have familiarity with that one? It's based more on the science of emotional intelligence, right, Wendy?
Yes, I've taken it, and it Intermetrics basically took the science that they used for the advanced insights and just, laid the emotional intelligence on top of it. TTI's is actually science based on emotional intelligence. So I did take it, and it was very informative.
Agreed. I did the same thing. I took the TTI version, and it was informative. Some things it simply validated, but validated them in a way that was informative and actually offered up ideas on improving. There's certain things about myself that I know would bring someone to think about low emotional intelligence, but they're on in terms of just some things that I know I have to work on, and even as a leader had to work on to make sure I didn't send the wrong signals in terms of not being approachable, things of that nature. So, which can affect, of course, and have a significant impact on the level of emotional intelligence that you have. So Nancy sort of tied that initially, he's talking about even just self-awareness, which is on the side that I'm speaking to.
Can I ask a question? Those who did the emotional intelligence thing under TTI, were you surprised by anything that it said? No? Cleveland?
So.
No, I guess not surprised, but I guess sometimes in a lot of these assessments, there are things that come out and you want to say, oh, that's not, well, so there were those types of,
okay.
There were those types of moments. Yeah. So, so it's a reminder. It's a reminder so that you, and a reinforcement of those actions that you need to take, and those things that you really need to be aware of. Yeah.
Thank you.
I would add to what Cleveland said. I also took the Trimetrics EQ, and I don't know if I was aware. So it was really revealing to me of where I stood and opportunities again for improved results. And I think it's great. It does give you, just like all the other reports with TTI, a great level of detail where you can go through it and see where are you on this. So it was revealing to me.
And so for those of you who took it, if you have familiarity with this chapter, is there anything in particular that rings out at you in terms of how that assessment ties to concepts in this chapter, or how you could use them to build on the concepts for an organization?
I would say, Virginia, based on what you've reviewed, the same way that Bradbury has in his 2.0 book, the concepts of the personal and the social fall in alignment with that. Some of the terminology is a little different, but the concepts are right spot on. So they fall right in alignment with the chapter that we have and the assessment that we can offer.
Thank you, Bertha.
I'd have to go back and look at my assessment again.
Does anyone have any other thoughts relative to the emotional intelligence, this idea of like bringing an organization from low to high or emotional intelligence, or an individual, or even how that plays into the motivation and culture aspect? Or does anyone have any direct experience with this that they'd like to share for the benefit of others?
You know, Virginia, in your opening comments, you talked about simply defining it in the proper context. And I think that is very important. I was listening to a world famous consultant give a speech about, he included it in a speech about subservient leadership, which is built around emotional intelligence. And he said it was a bunch of hogwash. But he gave no specifics. That was just his comments, you know, because his point was, his one point was, we've got to get results. And I found that to be contradictory in that I think this will allow you to generate a much higher level of results when there's a higher level of clarity in terms of how people process things, the level of empathy that you have, understanding their emotions better and how they process things. I think you can get greater results because it's not a one size fits all when it comes to leadership.
Thank you, Cleveland. And I think that's a good point too, that there's really a business case to be made for it as well. Sandy?
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, I think that clarification at the beginning is really important, because most people do get hung up on the first one. Oh, it has to do with the emotions, duh. You know, it relates to that. But it's really kind of touchy. I think there can be just tons of resistance in bringing up the topic, if not, you know, if either something hasn't already made it clear that there's a need for this. But I mean, and you mentioned, you know, you have to be, or somebody had said you have to be kind of delicate in how one approaches things, because people will jump to conclusions about what it means, I think. And I can just imagine tons and tons of resistance until they get to understand what this means and why it makes a difference. And if you don't get through the what this means and why it makes a difference, I think it's going to be really hard to get people to, you know, to go the course and try to make something of it.
Virginia, you talked about going to the facilitation guide, and I would be curious how the facilitation guide does suggest to do what Sandy just suggested. What my mind would go to is metaphors and how's it working here? And when something doesn't work, why isn't it working? So you back into, it's the concepts that create the working or not working. And as Cleveland just said, he disagreed with that unnamed, and I realize he's not naming that consultants. It said it's a bunch of hogwash, and it's the last thing as a bunch of hogwash. But as sometimes when somebody says, yeah, it's just bottom line results we're looking for, and it mostly will come about in the next chapter, that diversity will bring better results, as the same way with emotional intelligence. So that was my question on the facilitation guide, which I haven't looked at.
I don't know if the facilitation guide really talks to dealing with objections to emotional intelligence as a valid topic, which I think is, I mean, Sandy, what I heard was trying to get through that initial perception. Yeah. Right. And I was actually going to ask a follow-up question of how do we think we can get past that initial perception? Because some of that may be even in the selling phase, right, of trying to sell the process or the workshop if you're doing that. But Wendy, I don't recall, I'm sorry, Wendy, I don't recall the facilitation guide dealing with objections to even the concept.
Yeah, it's not specifically done that way because it's more of a situational thing, and it's really about having them have the conversation.
What I was going to say was what I found to be successful is always ask somebody what's not working, and then working backwards from what's not working. So even the concept, not even if the facilitation guy doesn't comment on a specific how-to, it's asking the question of what's the same as in the sales process. What's not working? What would you like to have better? What has happened when things have fallen down? And then working backwards to determine how this concept might apply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love that, Arnie, too, because I think it gets into the whole idea of understanding wants and needs and how this fulfills a need. Linda? Your question that you just proposed about, how do we get past that? I think starting with your slide, which has those definitions on it, is a great place to start. And kind of getting everybody on the same page. It's like, okay, here's the definition of emotions and here's the definition of intelligence. However, when we combine it, it comes out to be this. Mm-hmm. Do you agree? Do you agree with that? And if you don't, let's talk about that. So, just putting forth definitions and having people agree or disagree, and then why they're disagreeing, I think goes a long way to overcoming whatever their objections may be. Lauren, you're on mute. You're on mute, darling.
I was thinking of the statistic, and maybe I missed this, the one that indicates that 77% of a leader's success can be attributed to their level of emotional intelligence. And I just think that's a nice add-in that can work into this conversation.
Good, thank you.
By the way, when you were talking earlier, I could hear you really fine in the beginning. Then the last couple of comments you made, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I had a really hard time hearing you. So I don't know if it was your mic or what, or me.
Okay.
Yours. What? Was it just me that couldn't hear Arnie, or was it just me? Okay.
Somebody couldn't hear me. Oh my God.
You got really, it's like you got really quiet compared to when you were speaking earlier. So I don't know. Yeah, you got gems of wisdom to share, and I want to make sure I don't miss it.
Hey, Virginia, I didn't speak up at the beginning because I was instantly, the first thing that came into my mind is how do you get rid of that person with low emotional intelligence that's causing problems? But a split second later, what I said is the way that I would deal with this is why I like strategic planning. I would sit with that person and say, how are your behaviors matching up against our values? And I would step them through the values. It's how are they matching against our values? How are they matching against our vision? And how are they matching against our mission? That's your culture of your company.
You bet.
That you have. And so I try to measure them up against that. You guys know I don't do any analysis for this stuff. I just run through the steps of the strategic plan and the 6 steps to the call. But that's how I take that. And you can do performance reviews with people around that side of it and ask them how they're doing. They have to improve, because clearly if you have low emotional intelligence, you're not going to fit within the company. So that's what I do. I don't like to get rid of people, but there's times where you have to, if they're that disruptive, you have to get rid of them, and the rest of the people will be very happy that you did it.
That's right.
That's part of your job as a leader. So I just didn't want to start with that. It's probably not in the book.
No, thank you, Tom. I think it's a great tie too between the behavioral pieces of culture and that strategic planning value system, as well as the behaviors that come out through your level of emotional intelligence on that spectrum. Does anybody else have any gems or anything they want to share or talk about on emotional intelligence before I move on to the next chapter?
I'd like to just jump in real quick, Virginia, on Tom's point. And it's true, when you have someone who's disruptive like that and they're not willing to improve, then of course there has to be a separation. But I think the beauty of the fact that we have these chapters as content, and then the tools of the assessment is that we can come in and help people, because I don't know if a lot of people know this, you know, those communities and businesses that we serve, but emotional intelligence can be developed and can be improved. So if they're willing, they can be a part of our organization, if they're willing.
Mm-hmm. And I think just one last thing, or maybe not the last, but on overcoming obstacles. It also depends on who is the client a little bit. Like if you're doing a one-on-one coaching with the CEO or the, you know, the head of something, and they may have issues with other people on their executive team or somewhere else that they think are holding the company back. If you're doing a team, if your client is actually the team, there may be things within that team, and you've got both or more than one perspective at bay. Or if there's an employee, maybe a bit that Bertha was referring to, somebody who's not at the top of the ladder on their emotional intelligence, but the company wants to keep them, at least to give it a try, they may have you work with them as a coach. So who it is that you're working with also probably determines a little bit what the fact finding is in that case and how you then go about introducing the topic. Some you got to persuade them a bit, and others they've identified it. They've identified this and this is a problem. Now what? You can say, well, you know what I hear you talking about is X, and maybe we can, you know, pursue it like that. So okay, it does vary, I think, on who the client, what level, and whether it's a group, an individual, or whatever.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to the slide deck for a minute. Can everyone see that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. And what I'd like to do is transition to the next chapter, which is called Understanding Diversity While Creating Inclusion. And there's a really great quote in that chapter that really simplifies this for me that I love, which is diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And I know when I've posed it to people in that way, it's an easier concept for them to latch onto before we kind of do the deep dive. So I just wanted to share that with you. If you're not familiar with it already, I think it's a really simple way of framing it. So if we talk again about what's in the chapter, the opening of the chapter talks about what does diversity mean? And this is really about representation, and understanding and valuing uniquenesses. It talks a little bit about, well, not a little bit, it addresses understanding bias and unconscious bias. And it really looks at how differences can really enrich the organization and how important it is to not just say we have the representation, but to embrace those differences in the organization. It then goes on to look at what do we mean by inclusion? And so this gets back to inviting people to the dance and really looking at how do you create a business environment where people are treated fairly and respectively. There's a discussion too that I like about the difference between equality and fairness, right? So you could offer something to everyone equally, but that may not afford everyone the same opportunity. So it's really more about ensuring that everyone has fair access to different opportunities and resources within the organization, and that they are able and feel comfortable with fully contributing whatever their gifts and talents are. The chapter then goes on to some other sections where it really talks about diversity as it relates to culture and also as it relates to a strategy for growth. It gets into the idea that leadership, it's really a top-down responsibility in terms of embracing a diverse culture within the organization. It talks about inclusion as a competitive advantage. I like this idea of building a mosaic, not a melting pot. So it's not just about bringing the diversity to the table and recognizing it, but it's really helping to enable the talents that come from that diverse pool rise to the top. And then there's a discussion on the business case for diversity. There's also a section that I really like. If you haven't seen it yet, I suggest you go look at it, talking about this ability to be comfortable in the uncomfortable and what are 6 traits of an inclusive leader, you know, which includes things like their level of consciousness is raised. They embrace collaborations, this idea of cultural intelligence, which I think is really important to this part of the chapter. So what I'd like to do now from the facilitation guide is do an example of one of the group exercises. And this is a group exercise called I Am, But I Am Not. If everybody could just take out a piece of paper, it doesn't matter how big it is, and fold it in half so that you have 2 separate columns. And in the first column, you're going to write the words I am. In the second column, you're going to write the words I am not. And between the 2 columns, you're going to write the word but. And so what I'd like you to do is for you to come up with 3 to 5 statements that represent you in terms of I am, but I am not. And they could be related to some of the you know, standard ways we think about diversity in terms of gender, ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation, or they could be something else where maybe you've seen some type of bias or felt some type of bias in the workplace. So just as an example of something else, I'll just share with you. If you haven't noticed, I tend to be soft-spoken, and I've always been soft-spoken. In one of my defense industry jobs, I was working for a company that had a Middle Eastern parent where the culture was very much, in order to be successful, you had to be very loud and in your face. And when I first took my job in this company, it was about a month after I had had my thyroid removed and was experiencing some effects on my vocal cords. And they didn't know it at the time. I never really told anybody except my immediate boss. But even if I had wanted to shout at the top of my lungs, I physically would not have been able to do it. So one thing I might write here at that time would be, I am soft-spoken, but I am not ineffective. Okay, so that's just an example of something that you might bring in that might not be part of that standard diversity wheel. So I'm gonna stop talking and give you a couple minutes. And when you're done writing a couple of examples for yourselves, if you could please just look up so we know you're done. Okay, does everybody have a little time to come up with a couple things? And you don't necessarily have to share exactly what you wrote, but is anybody willing to share what this might have done in terms of raising your awareness on stereotypes or bias, or how that might affect how you deal with people or clients or organizations in the future?
Yes.
Okay. What can you share with us, Arnie? You're never short.
As I went through writing stuff down, I realized maybe I must rethink what I am not. Okay. I mean, some of it's easy. I mean, you know, the first was I am old, but I'm not biased against youth. Okay, that's easy. Okay. But when I put some other ones down, I realized, I'm not sure I can honestly answer, but that I am not. And so it raised awareness.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
I would agree with Arnie. I had something similar on my list, Arnie, that says, I am mature, but I am not old. So for those of us who, you know, have a few years on us, I think that's part of it. But you're absolutely right, Arnie. It's easy to say, to rattle off those things that says what I am, but then you go and look at it and you go, well, what's the flip side of that? You know, what's the I am not, what's the I am not part?
Yes.
You know, if I'm this, I mean, I'll give you another example. On the I am, I said, I am opinionated. But so I had to really think about what went on the other side. And what I wound up writing down was, but I am not stuck in those opinions.
Well, I guess the challenge is that a true statement? The I am not. Yeah. Is that a true statement? And I'm not asking you to confess it is or isn't. That's the challenge.
Right.
Is that, and that's what I was finding as I went through a bunch of these. I found, could I honestly state the I am
but
not?
You are not. Well, is it
truth or perception?
Is it truth or perception? And who's the better decision maker on that, in that vein? You or people who know you?
Oh, definitely people who know me.
Yeah.
I'll be self-deluding all the time, as we all will be.
Okay. Nancy has her hand up.
Well, to kind of go along with Linda and Arnie, I actually had the first one and it said, I am 72, but I'm not old. So that's my perception. But the second one has to do with something that just happened to me. And I'm trying to wrap my head around it. It's regarding race. Because when you look at me, I got red hair and white skin. And for the longest time in my family, you could trace the family tree back to the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, all buried in cemeteries in Pennsylvania. Except my cousin has been very, very diligently exploring the family tree on my mother's side. And just 2 weeks ago, she discovered, and this is how close, my great-grandmother was a mulatto, and my great-great-grandfather was Black, according to the census records. And Linda, go on. And I'm not quite sure, you know, I'm trying to process this, and it's so fast. My Black friends think this is great. I mean, like, okay, we knew you were cousins, you know, especially my Cameroonian people, they've already adopted me. I don't know how to process it. It's like, well, what really am I? And when I mentioned it at church yesterday, our priest said, wow, that's really great. And I don't know why it would be great. I said, look, to me, it's a message that we are all interconnected one way or another. So I don't need to put myself in a box. But that might be interesting when you're talking to someone, just because the color of their skin looks one way, that might not really address how they internally view themselves. I'm just like, I'm not quite sure how to deal with this. Like, I wasn't expecting this one.
Wow, that's interesting. Thank you for sharing, Nancy.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
On a slightly different, it seems like we all focused on our age or something. I mean, I had put down, I am past the old official retirement age, but I'm not retired. So it was, you know, the same thing. I use a similar exercise in doing things with people about working in a multicultural workplace and how to be more effective, and use it as an exercise on stereotypes. And so using what is a stereotype about part of your identity, but that you don't share that stereotype, in fact. you know, and because often that the stereotypes are the first impressions that you bring to bear, because it's part of bias and all kinds of stuff. So it's another way. I mean, one way is the perceptions at the moment. Another is something that's a bit more deep-seated in terms of stereotyping people. You know, like Nancy, you look at her, red hair and white skin. Okay, so she's an X. That means the stereotype is Y. And then is that true or not true? And the fact is often, you know, certainly on the individual basis, stereotypes are almost never true. There may be a cultural generality that is valid as a generality, but as a stereotype, it's not. Mm-hmm. So it's just another way to use the exercise. So it's a very good one.
Thank you, Sandy.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to share anything?
Well, I wrote down, I'm a Southerner, but I am not a raging white supremacist. And so, I mean, that you know, every one of us gets categorized in some way. And so, I also had I'm an older guy, but I am not dead yet.
Yeah.
Seemingly,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Can we hear from some of the younger folks on this call who maybe wrote down stuff not related to age?
I did not write down anything related to my age.
Yay, Tracy!
Lauren,
I did not write anything regarding my age. How about that?
How about that?
But I flunked because I put I'm a man of integrity. I couldn't figure out what I'm not. I'm goal driven, couldn't figure out what I'm not. So I said I'm tenacious, but not stubborn. And then I flunked that. I said, no, you're stubborn. So I flunked them all. Hey, Arnie, I'm like you. I flunked that stuff.
Well, but Tom, let me say this. Could you take that and reverse that and say, I am stubborn, but I'm not. No, you can't. Never mind. Forget that.
Nah.
You can't flip that. No.
Lauren, were you going to say something?
I was going to share that I also didn't pick age-related ones, but not because I don't have a bunch of age on me. I took a note from you, Virginia. I am quiet, but I am not without opinion. I am soft-spoken, but I'm not a shrinking wallflower. I am gifted, but I'm not a self-promoter.
Interesting.
And my last one related to our last conversation, I am, I think, emotionally intelligent, but I'm not stuck where I am now.
Thank you, Lauren. I have one more segment I want to do in this session. So do we have any other last thoughts or burning thoughts on this exercise or the diversity and inclusion chapter before I move on?
I do, if it's okay. Is that when I was doing something on this, and I like you, Virginia, I was preparing a talk to a group on diversity. And what struck me in the chapter was seeing diversity. The benefits of it are success. That the more we include more different people, the richer the ideas will be. That if I only work with people that look like me or sound like me, I will not do well in a competitive environment. And one of the examples is in much of the world where women are not allowed to contribute, the world where women are allowed to contribute eats their lunch because it's a broader population that you're drawing from. Now, if you extend that to all things diverse, and so if we draw from the populations of everybody, we tend to get better results because we're getting more ideas. And so if everybody's playing on a competitive landscape, diversity is necessary. Now, the inclusion part is interesting but just the beginnings of diversity, and then providing the mechanisms where everybody can succeed. And they succeed based on performance.
Thank you, Arnie. Cleveland, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to add that on my I am, but I am not. And I deal with this often. You know, I'm not a big smiler if I don't know you or when I meet people initially, but I'm not mad.
That's it.
Thank you. I love that.
I'm told that often. Gosh, what are you upset about? Nothing. It's just the way I look. So anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna move on.
Can I just add one more comment, Virginia, before you move on?
Sure.
This is Sandy. Sorry, I don't.
You only get one.
Yep, I'm only doing one. I just want to say that if one uses that quote at the beginning about diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance, I actually think that's not enough, and one has to take it to the third piece, which is, I mean, you can call it equity, which is another concept, is being the one who organizes the party and makes the decisions, because both of these you are being included at somebody else's request. They're being nice to ask you to the party. They're being nice to ask you to dance, but you're not equal. And I think part of what we're trying to get at is that, you know, real inclusion or beyond to equity is that people have the right to be there on their own right and to contribute equally and to be as successful as anybody else, up to their abilities, of course.
Thank you, Sandy.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't want to run out of time here.
Right.
So I wanted to just offer, share something with you as food for thought as we wrap this up. And I found a video that really resonated with me and that I think applies to both these chapters. And just a personal story. One of the reasons I really resonated to this is in one of my corporate jobs, I was working on a vice president's staff, and I was on FMLA, in and out of work because my mom had had a subarachnoid hemorrhage, and it was a very long path to recovery. And one day when I had come back in the office, one of my peers, the director of engineering, came to my doorway and just knocked. And I had never really talked to this person much in my life. And he said, Virginia, I heard about your mother. I just wanted to say I've been thinking about you and see how you're doing. And he shared with me that he had just returned from visiting his sister who had stage 3 bone cancer and had chosen to have her leg amputated to try to save her life. And he said to me, you know, if there's one thing that I've really realized in the last few months, it's that every day somebody is carrying something around with them on their journey line, whether it's someone who works for you, who works with you, someone you see in the supermarket, and we never know what it is they're carrying around. And he said, since I've thought about that, it's really made me a lot more effective in working with people to just pause and say, say to myself, I don't know what I don't know about what this person is carrying around. So the video that I found, and Wendy's going to share this package on the website later, and the link is here if you'd like to use it or watch it again, but I thought I would show it to you now. It's one that the Cleveland Clinic put in place a few years ago, kind of along the same lines of what if you understood what people were carrying with them on their journey line, and what if that understanding, what would that do to make us more effective in patient care? And I just really think that it extends to a lot of things we've talked about. So let me find the video and I will share that. And I think I have this on for sound. If I don't, somebody give a shout. Can you hear it?
Yes.
Yep.
That's outstanding.
I'm sorry, say again.
Outstanding. Yeah.
That's all I have. Any closing thoughts, or I'll give you 5 minutes of your day back?
You know, I one thing I'll think that it just popped in my head a minute ago. I've seen people in public behave in ways that I thought was just absolutely ridiculous. And I've seen some of those people come back to the person that they offended or whatever and say, hey, you know what, I'm sorry. It was a bad day. I'm having a really bad day. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, I'm thinking, what could be that bad? Well, you just showed us a whole bunch of examples. So.
Thank you, Cleveland.
I'd like to thank Virginia for all the work she did to bring us this session, especially that video at the end. It certainly is something that you could share with groups of folks and really get conversations started and getting folks thinking about the other person. So thank you, Virginia, and thank you everyone for spending the afternoon with us.
Thanks, everybody.
Will you put that video on the website?
It's on the, yeah. It's on the slide.
It'll be uploaded where the Learning Lab will be.
Thank you, Virginia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia.
Thanks for participating.
Well done.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.